Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Trending Tuesday. I'm your host Sharda Tickoo, Country Manager, Trend AI India and SAC. Now, critical infrastructure sits at the intersection of business continuity and operational risk, where cyber incident is just not a data event, it's more than that. So as IT and OT are converging, and we see that from a vulnerability management standpoint, it's just not about managing the lists, it goes much beyond that. And we have seen that security leaders are not looking at the answers of where vulnerable am I. The answers they are looking at is that how much exposed am I. Now, to discuss about how exposure management has been redefined in today's era, and especially in this critical infrastructure, I'm joined by Mr. Sumit Lale, who is the Group Head Information Security for Tata Power. Hi, Sumit. Thanks for taking time out. So let me, set the stage and drive straight in.
Yeah.
So Tata Power operates infrastructure where I think a cyber incident has a real world consequence. And we know that cyber risk is a conversation that is so relevant in today's time. So Sumit, the first question I want to jump straight right in is that, Tata Power, you operate an infrastructure where a cyber incident is just not a data event. The consequences are more real, right? So how has your approach to understanding and managing cyber risk in this whole evolved IT and OT converged environment changed? How have you evolved?
Yeah. So if you look in the past, the IT security is more about, protection of the data, protection of your confidential information, or prevention of a data leakage.
Right.
But now as an IT and OT world converged, the threat landscape which IT was experiencing is now been inherited into OT environments as well. Right. So in the context of a power utility company like us, or maybe in any manufacturing company, the focus has now completely been shifted from, looking at it as a data protection related relevant threats to more like a physical consequences associated.
Absolutely true.
Right. So, and any cyber incident can have a catastrophic impact. Either the entire grid supply can go down, or maybe the entire manufacturing can turn it off. Or even more severe, it can have a human safety related impact at the shop.
The city can be brought down. Yeah,
true. So the older approach of treating the same risk management framework that we adopted for IT is not going to work in the OT now. Now it is more evident that the entire attack surface, which has now been earlier the attackers used to compromise the IT system, that can have a catastrophic impact in the OT world. And the CISO strategies are now more on in these days are basically to focus on how we can analyze the attack surface, how we can identify the key touch points where the attacks can gain access into my OT environment, how I can monitor, isolate those systems which are vulnerable, and then build a mitigation strategy around how to protect my OT assets. So that was the whole change of the entire strategy, which has been came into existence once these OT attacks has now came more into the news. And
because of course IT has always been a conduit to OT environment. So as the exposure layer of the attack surface of the IT environment explodes, and I think the consequent impact on OT environments will also happen. So, another question which is more, specific when we talk about cyber threats, I don't think any conversation is complete without talking about vulnerabilities, right? When we are talking about vulnerability management, it's not a new problem to have. But there have been times, and I think still now also, from a vulnerability management standpoint, there is a checklist approach, which is to say that many security teams are still following that. This is a list of vulnerabilities. How many vulnerabilities do I have? How many vulnerabilities I have patched? How many are open? So do you think that is a practical model in today's era? Or do you think that this whole approach of vulnerability management also needs to be reformed, given that, we are talking about these frontier AI models, which bear the velocity of the vulnerability discovery is going to increase. So what are your thoughts there?
So I can see that a traditional CVSS based vulnerability exposure management program is not that much you can say of importance these days, because if I follow the entire CVSS score of let's say 8 or 10 on my one of the vulnerable system, which is completely isolated, hidden deep inside my network, and will cut off from the internet world, the CVSS score is meaningless for, right? It is now the entire strategy is being slowly moving upon to understand the entire attack kill chain. What are the exposed touch points on those lying on those kill chain, and then start fixing those things on priority rather than having a complete reliance on the CBS based course.
So very much
system.
context.
So that was the limitation of the traditional CBSS based vulnerability management program. It doesn't have a more meaningful context.
Absolutely. So you're seeing that it definitely there's a need to look at a newer approach. And so that brings me to another question specifically to OT environments. Now in OT environments, we know, I think this is a problem which is prevalent. There are legacy applications. Patching an OT system means that, you have to kind of have the complete business downtime. In power utility specifically, many systems simply can't be patched on a regular cycle. So how do you communicate that risk to the board, or how do you tell your board that while you could not patch, but you have still kind of remediated the risk? What are the approach that you use in your organization?
So, in the context of ours in the power utility sector or any traditional OT environment, you can see patching is the biggest challenge, right? I mean, I cannot just tell my shop floor or a plant engineer to turn on off the turbine for me so that I need to patch.
Yeah.
Right. So, the more focus is on the business continuity and resilience aspects and the operational continuity rather than just focusing on fixing the patching, right? So I turn my entire conversation when I interact with the board or maybe the senior leadership is to understand them the concept of a compensatory controls, how we protect our OT assets through the attacks which are happening, and how are our isolated strategies, that how quickly we can isolate those systems.
Yeah.
So when it comes, there are so many techniques. Either I can improvise my architecture, do the micro segmentation, deploy the virtual patching on those systems. So at least I can have a monitoring and detection in place. So while explaining it to the board or the leadership team, I help them understand that yes, every traditional OT environment has vulnerable systems, maybe due to the limitation of OEM dependencies or maybe a legacy systems are in
no
there,
perfect
right?
environment.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, but it is more, the talk is more about providing them the assurance that even though we have those things, how we are actually been, implemented our security stand to quickly isolate and have a protection and monitoring control in place so that if something goes wrong, at least we can have an insights on the first hand. So take an action and do the isolation and mitigation record.
Absolutely. I think you talked about virtual patching, and since we've been doing Trend AI has been doing virtual patching for almost a decade, if not more. And in last 2 to 3 weeks, since the whole Mythos story broke and these frontier AI models have started, doing the mainstream talking, I feel that virtual patching as a compensatory control has become all the more relevant, and which you were anyway using from a OT security standpoint. So yeah, I think great to hear that. So, another question is that AI is also changing the ways organizations find and prioritize the exposure. So what's your plan for next 30 days, to leverage AI to find and prioritize the risk exposure areas in your environment?
So, not the 30 days, but I can see the long-term vision of utilizing the AI capability, specifically in the cybersecurity era, is to basically utilize the area to, have a better clarity on the understanding the attack surface, right? And how we can, feed in the huge amount of data and utilizing the AI capabilities to build a correlation around it. So it can help us in our exposure management. We expect the AI technologies and the tools that we have is to give us very focused insights on how, if the attacker can gain access into my critical infrastructure, what are the key attack paths they can utilize. So my focus and give me the actionable results and then intelligence that how I can fix those things so that I can, put a block on those attack paths. So definitely the agenda and the idea of entire using the AI technologies to not have thousands of vulnerabilities, but the key focus and priority ones where I can put my security analyst focusing on keeping those patched and have those mitigated on prior.
Perfect. Because of course AI will help you figure out that, hey, does this attack even lead to a path which you should be worried about not? So you will accordingly prioritize. So AI makes this job very easy. So Sumit, that brings us to a very interesting, section of today's Trending Tuesday. We call it Proactive Pulse. The deal is that, I ask you a question and whatever thought immediately comes into your mind, you have to answer that. It's more like a rapid fire question. So shall we begin? So the first question is that, what is your biggest blind spot in OT security today?
The biggest blind spot I can say is the unmonitored third-party vendor connections.
Very true. I think it's candid and I think it's absolutely true. Patch or compensating control, what do you reach for first?
Definitely compensating controls because it gives me a time to plan and strategize my patching cycle.
One signal that tells you your exposure is genuinely under control and you're peaceful in night.
Well, I can say my time to detect and isolate is much faster than the attacker strategy.
So if you have to use one word to define today's cyber risk management, the future of cyber risk management, what would it be?
I'll say cyber resilience.
Cyber resilience. Thank you, Sumit, for such insight. So what this conversation definitely reinforces is that when we are talking about critical infrastructure and when we are talking about cyber risk management, it cannot be point in time. It has to be contextual. It has to be continuous. It has to have visibility across everything you operate. And I think there were some great points that, Sumit, you made during the conversation. Thank you so much for these insights. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in yet again. Thank you.